Nobody noticed the quiet housekeeper, until the Mafia boss declared her the lady of the estate. A true story. Rosa Ferry woke up every morning at 5 o'clock. Not because an alarm told her to, but because her body had learned that the estate needed her before it needed anything else. She would wash her face with cold water, pull her dark hair into a low braid, button her gray uniform to the collar, and walk out into the quiet hallways of the Morone estate as the first pale light came through the tall windows. She had worked there for 3 years. In 3 years, she had cleaned 142 rooms. She had replaced more flower arrangements than she could count. She had pressed tablecloths, polished silver, arranged fruit in bowls that would barely be touched before she cleared them away again. She had done all of this without being asked twice, without complaining, and without being noticed by the men who owned everything around her. Dante Morone was not the kind of man who noticed housekeepers. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made the air feel heavier. He wore dark suits that fit him perfectly. He spoke quietly, which made people lean in to hear him, which was, Rosa had always suspected, exactly the point. He ran his family's business, a business that involved many late-night meetings, many men in black cars, and many conversations that stopped the moment she appeared in a doorway with a tray or a fresh set of towels. Rosa had learned very quickly not to be curious about any of it. Curiosity, in a place like the Morone estate, was a dangerous luxury. She was not here to understand the men who came and went. She was here to make sure the glasses were spotless and the hallways smelled of fresh lavender. She kept her eyes low. She moved like water, finding the fastest path through any room without disturbing anything. The other staff called her the ghost. Not meanly. It was almost a compliment. A ghost did her work and disappeared. A ghost did not cause problems. Rosa had spent a great deal of her life trying not to cause problems. She had grown up in a small town in the south of the country where her father ran a small shop that barely earned enough to keep the family fed. She had been a good student, sharp and quiet, the kind of girl her teachers liked because she paid attention. For 2 years she had studied literature at university in the city, and she had loved it deeply, the way stories held the weight of real life, the way a single sentence could say everything a person was afraid to say aloud. Then her father's debts caught up with the family, and she came home, and the world she had been carefully building for herself folded up like a piece of paper and was put away somewhere she could not find it. After that came years of smaller things. A difficult marriage to a man who turned out to be nothing like what he seemed. A quiet separation. A series of jobs, a hotel in Florence, a private villa on the coast, then finally this estate, where a friend of a friend said the pay was good and the expectations were simple. Keep the rooms clean. Keep yourself invisible. Do not ask questions. Rosa had followed all 3 rules without effort. But there was one thing she could not stop herself from doing, no matter how carefully she tried. She noticed things. She noticed everything. She noticed that the 3rd step on the east staircase creaked at 2 in the morning but not at noon, because the wood expanded in the heat of the day. She noticed that Marco, the tall enforcer who followed Dante everywhere, always touched his left shoulder when he was worried about something. She noticed that the kitchen garden, a small walled space behind the main house, had been completely neglected, and that someone had once planted roses there, because the thorn stems still came back every spring without being asked. And she noticed, though she told herself many times not to, that Dante Morone had sad eyes. Not sad in a way he would ever show. Not sad in a way anyone else seemed to see. But Rosa had spent years reading rooms the way other people read books, and what she read in Dante Morone, in the rare moments he was still, was a man who was very tired of being exactly who he was. She told herself this did not matter to her. For a long time, she was almost right. The night that changed everything began like any other important night at the estate. A visiting family had arrived, men from another part of the country, powerful in their own territory, here to discuss something Rosa was not supposed to hear. The dining room had been prepared with extraordinary care, the good china, the crystal glasses, the silverware polished until it shone like mirrors. Signora Vitali, the head housekeeper who had run the estate for 20 years and who regarded Rosa with the particular suspicion of a woman whose position felt threatened, had overseen every detail personally. But Signora Vitali had missed one thing. Rosa saw it the moment she passed through the dining room to refill the water pitcher. On the side table near the window, half beneath a folded napkin, left there by one of the younger staff who had not understood what it was, sat a document. A single page of paper covered in numbers and names. Rosa did not read it. She did not need to. She recognized the format from a similar paper she had once seen Dante reviewing through the glass door of his study, and she understood instinctively that it was not something meant for the eyes of guests. She did not hesitate. Without changing her pace, without glancing toward the table where the men were seated, she crossed the room, refilled the nearest glass, and on her way back, folded the document into the cloth she was carrying as naturally as if she were simply tidying up. She walked out. She placed the document on Dante's private desk. She returned to the kitchen and said nothing to anyone. The evening continued without incident. She thought that was the end of it. The next morning, she was on her knees in the corridor outside the library, cleaning the baseboards, when she heard footsteps stop behind her. She did not look up immediately. Footsteps stopped near her all the time. People moved around her without speaking the way they moved around furniture. "How long have you been paying attention?" She looked up. Dante Morone was standing in the hallway, looking down at her with an expression she could not immediately read. He was not angry. He was not warm. He was simply watching her. As if he had asked the question sincerely and actually wanted to know the answer. Rosa stood up slowly. She wiped her hands on her cloth. She met his eyes, because she had decided long ago that she would not be the kind of woman who looked at the floor when spoken to. "Since I arrived," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once, very slightly, and walked away. That was all. 3 words from her, 1 nod from him, and yet everything after that was different. Over the following weeks, small things changed. Her responsibilities were quietly adjusted, not by anyone speaking to her directly, but by the way her daily schedule began to include rooms and timings that placed her, without explanation, near certain meetings. Not inside them. Never inside them. But close enough that she was present in the margins of his working day in a way she had never been before. She continued to say nothing. She continued to notice everything. She noticed that one of the younger household staff, a man who had been hired 6 weeks ago, was too careful. Too clean. Too aware of which rooms he should not be seen entering, which meant that he entered them when he believed no one was looking. Rosa had been invisible long enough to know that people always believed no one was looking. They were wrong when she was nearby. She began to leave small, silent evidence. A water glass placed on the left side of a particular tray instead of the right. A window latch in an unusual position. Marks that would mean nothing to anyone else but that she believed, she hoped, the men she had seen studying every detail of his own estate would eventually read correctly. He did. When the accusation came, presented by Marco with a careful, serious face, suggesting that Rosa herself was the source of the suspicious activity, Dante sat in his chair and listened to every word without expression. Then he stood, went to the place where she had left her first small sign 6 weeks earlier, and followed the trail she had built for him, quietly and methodically, all the way to its end. The actual problem was found. It was handled. Rosa was not spoken to about it. But the following morning, when she came to the kitchen garden to begin the work she had slowly been doing there, clearing the old growth, turning the soil, coaxing the old rose stems back into something that might, with time, actually bloom, she found that someone had left a small pair of good gardening gloves on the stone bench. Her size. Still in their paper wrapping. She sat down on the bench. She held the gloves in her hands for a long time. She had not cried since the year her marriage ended. She did not cry now. But she felt, in a way she had not felt in a very long time, that she was being seen. Not watched. Seen. There was a difference, and it lived in the chest, and it was both wonderful and frightening. That night, in her small room on the upper floor of the East Wing, Rosa opened the journal she kept beneath her mattress, her only private thing, the only place she had ever allowed herself to be completely honest, and she wrote the truth. She wrote that she had spent 3 years making herself invisible and had somehow, without meaning to, allowed this man to find her. She wrote that she was not afraid of the world he lived in, because she had grown up around the edges of hard things and had learned that hard things did not define a person as much as the choices they made inside them. She wrote that she admired him, that his sadness made her feel tender toward him rather than cautious, and that she did not know what to do with any of that. She tore the page out. She folded it carefully. She did not throw it away. The crisis came on a Tuesday. A betrayal deep inside the inner circle, a man Dante had trusted for years, brought chaos to the estate in a way that Rosa felt in the walls before anyone said a word aloud. She had learned to read the estate like a living thing, and what she felt that morning was the particular tension that came before something broke. She did not panic. She went through the estate quietly and methodically, in the hours before anyone understood what was happening, and she did the things she knew how to do. She made sure certain doors were locked. She made sure certain people were moved to certain rooms, not because anyone told her to, but because 3 years of paying attention had given her a map of this place that no one else had thought to make. She knew which staff member could be trusted completely and which one had started making private phone calls 2 weeks ago. She knew which exit was unwatched at which hour. 3 people were protected that day who would not have been otherwise. One of them mattered to Dante more than he had ever said aloud to anyone. In the days after, the estate was quiet in a different way, the quiet of something that has come through a storm and is still standing. Staff moved carefully. Men came and went in low conversations. Dante worked long hours and said very little to anyone. Rosa packed her bag. It was the logical thing to do. She had made herself too visible now. She had stepped out of her ghost shape and into something that had Northwest proper place in this household. She did not regret it, but she understood that places like this operated by rules, and she had broken several of them simply by existing too clearly. She had folded her second uniform and was reaching for her journal when the door opened. Dante stood in the doorway. He looked at the bag on the bed. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not anger, not surprise. Something quieter and more complicated. "You are not leaving," he said. "That is not your decision," she said. She had spoken plainly to him before, in small ways. But this was different. This was the whole truth of her, standing in a room she had always treated as temporary, refusing to pretend. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I am making it mine." It was not a romantic speech. It was not full of beautiful words. It was simply a man who had spent his whole life taking control of everything around him, saying clearly that he was not willing to let this one thing go. And because Rosa had been paying attention for 3 years, she understood that for Dante Morone, who held on to nothing he did not calculate first, this was the most unguarded sentence he had ever spoken. She left her bag on the bed. She sat down in the chair by the window. She asked him to sit down too. He did. They talked for a long time. About real things. About the weight of the choices a person makes when the world does not give them good options. About what it means to protect something. About what it costs to be honest with yourself after years of not being. It was the most ordinary conversation either of them had ever had, and it was the most important. 3 days later, Dante called the senior staff together. Rosa was not told about the meeting. She assumed it had nothing to do with her and went to the kitchen garden, where the roses were, against all reasonable expectation, beginning to show small green buds at the ends of their stems. She was kneeling in the soil, very gently working around the base of the oldest plant, when she heard Signora Vitali's sharp footsteps on the stone path behind her. Rosa looked up. Signora Vitali's expression was unreadable. She stopped a few feet away and looked at Rosa for a long moment with something in her eyes that was not quite respect and not quite resentment, but was somewhere between the two, the look of a woman who has just been surprised by something she did not see coming. "He is asking for you," she said. Simply that. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. Rosa stood. She removed the gardening gloves, the ones left on the bench in their paper wrapping, and she washed her hands at the small outdoor tap and she walked back into the estate. The senior staff were gathered in the formal meeting room. Marco was there, standing by the wall, arms folded, watching everything with his usual careful eyes. Dante stood at the head of the table. There was a chair beside him that was not usually there. He looked at Rosa when she entered. He did not smile, he rarely did. But his eyes were different. The sadness she had always read there had not disappeared, because sadness built over many years does not simply vanish. But there was something alongside it now. Something steady. Something that looked, to the woman who had been reading rooms her entire life, very much like peace. "Rosa Ferri," he said, in the same quiet voice that made rooms go still, "is the lady of this estate. This is not a question. Anyone who speaks to her or of her without that understanding is speaking to me the same way. No one in the room moved. Marco uncrossed his arms slowly. He looked at Rosa. She looked back at him, not defiantly, not nervously, but steadily. Honestly. The way she had always looked at things she was not afraid of. He gave a short, single nod. That evening, Rosa returned to her room and picked up the folded page from her journal. She had carried it with her for weeks, and she had told herself many times to throw it away, and she never had. Now she carried it downstairs, walked to the study, and placed it on Dante's desk. She did not leave a note with it. She did not need to. He would know what it was. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in years. In the morning, when she came to the kitchen garden at her usual time, she stopped at the gate. Dante was already there. He was standing in front of the roses, looking at the small green buds with the focused attention of a man trying to understand something new. He was not wearing his jacket. He had turned his sleeves up. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, completely like a person rather than a position. He heard her at the gate and turned. He held up the old wooden plant marker she had pushed into the soil weeks ago, the one with the rose variety written in her small, neat handwriting. Climbing Cecile Brunner, he read. Is that what they are? Yes, she said. How long before they bloom? She walked through the gate and stood beside him, both of them looking at the old stems with their new small signs of life. They already are, she said. He looked at her. And this time, very quietly, he smiled. The estate was exactly as it had always been, the stone walls, the wisteria over the archways, the lake glittering far below in the morning light. Nothing about the building had changed. But the air inside it was different now, in the way that air is always different when something invisible finally becomes real. Rosa Ferry had spent 3 years making herself a ghost. She had done it carefully, patiently, because she had learned that the world was easier to move through when you did not take up too much space. But she had never, not once, stopped paying attention. And in the end, that was the thing that had seen her through. Not luck. Not beauty. Not any quality the world would have thought to look for in a woman on her knees cleaning a baseboard at 5 in the morning. Just this, she had kept her eyes open when it would have been easier to close them. She had stayed curious when it would have been safer not to be. She had held onto herself through everything, the hard years, the small rooms, the invisible mornings, and when the moment came that someone finally looked at her and truly saw her, she was still entirely, completely there. That, more than anything, was the beginning.